Welcome to a very special hour-long episode of Scary Stories. We've got 4 really different and interesting Dogman stories and research in this one. Before we begin though, I'd like to show a photo and see if any of you know what this is. Is that a real Dogman or werewolf? And what about this one, standing in the back over here? 2 apparent Dogmen in the same photo. Look at the feet. They don't look like human feet to me. Is this for real? If not, what is it from? If any of you can provide me with an answer to that in the comments, I'd be willing to share a link to one of our secret uncensored Dogman episodes with you. You'd have to shoot me an email or provide some other way for me to share the link with you privately. If someone can figure this out, I might give the prize to the first 3 who can answer. And if you can solve this puzzle and are already a channel member or PayPal Club member, then I'll come up with some other prize for you. So, what do you think? Have you ever seen this picture before? While you're thinking about that, let's jump into our first of 4 Dogman stories. And we call this one... I've gotten a few of these stories of people going legend tripping and finding the Dogman where they had expected to see other kinds of scary things. I like these kinds of stories because I don't get to travel to these locations myself, and this is the next best thing to getting to visit actual scary locations in person. Here's an account from some southern legend trippers out looking for ghosts, but finding themselves face to face with the Dogman on the haunted tracks. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a legend tripping story for you where we went out looking for ghosts in a spooky location and ended up getting terrorized by Dogman instead. Here's how it went down. So I was staying for a couple of weeks with a cousin in Texas whose parents went on vacation to Hawaii with my parents. This was my real 18th birthday present, to be left alone with my 19-year-old cousin in Texas without adult supervision. I mean, we were the adults. We were over 18 after all. One night, I asked my cousin if he knew about any haunted roads in his area that we could drive around to and try to scare each other. He didn't know any, but he invited over these 2 completely insane friends of his, and they suggested we hop into the car and go over to Villamain Road and Shane Road, which is in San Antonio, Texas. I assumed that meant it was close by, because I forever underestimated how large Texas can be. We were on the outskirts of Columbus, Texas, home of the Santa Claus Museum. To get to San Antonio meant a drive of 125 miles. If you get lucky with the traffic, you might get there in a little over 2 hours. Nobody explained that to me until we had already been driving through the hot night for over an hour. The car had no air conditioner, which meant wide open windows. As we got closer and closer to the spooky location, we all kept looking up more stories about the place we were driving to on our phones. As we read them aloud, we got increasingly more and more creeped out, with the heat forcing us to keep the windows open. I know I, for one, felt a whole lot more vulnerable. There was nothing between us and whatever wanted to walk up to our car. Initially, we read off the traditional myths associated with the place. It's a narrow, winding road through the forest called Villamain Road, and then it empties out onto a train crossing which is even more known for real-life tragedy than it is for its legends of hauntings. In fact, in the years since the events of the story I'm telling you, there's been even more tragedy in that location. People get hit, cars get into accidents. I would advise avoiding the place unless it's the only route you can take to get where you need to go. I would never take this road again for the purposes of legend tripping. This is not a place to go for amusement. This place takes scary to a level where it's definitely no fun any longer. It's a cliche to say it, but if I had known then what I know now, I would never have agreed to go to the intersection of Villamain and Shane Roads in San Antonio, Texas, on that night in the early 2000s. Nevertheless, I did, and since I survived the ordeal, I suppose I'd better pass what happened along to you as a cautionary tale to keep you from repeating my mistakes. So this is one of several haunted spots in the United States, which are supposed to be the locations where a busload of kids perished through some horrible means. In nearly every area in which this legend exists, there are variations in which the kids were done away in an accident by the murderous bus driver and by other means. Invariably, the ghosts of the children are said to gather to push any car stuck on the railroad tracks forward and out of danger. This has been explained away by debunkers by pointing out that most of the locations in question are actually built on an imperceptible slant, deliberately designed to cause cars to roll safely out of danger. They don't look like they're on a slope, but if you bring a level with you, most of the time you will discover that it is only an optical illusion that the vehicle is on a level plane. So that part seems easy to explain away. What is less easy to explain is why some people claim they see tiny child-sized handprints on their car after being pushed to safety. It's especially hard to explain at this particular railroad crossing, since it seems pretty definitive that no busload of children ever passed away at that spot. Lots of adults and teenagers have gotten into terrible accidents there, though, I'll grant you that. It seems an unsafe place to walk and an unsafe place to drive. I think part of it is accidental. The road leading to the intersection is not lit well enough, for one thing. The other reason I think that spot is so deadly continuing up to this day is that it seems to be an open door to some kind of energy that is unhealthy for humans to be around. I'm not exactly an expert in feng shui or any other kind of study of earth energies, so I'm really kind of pulling this stuff out of my butt, but I bet if you brought in people who understood ley line energy or some sort of discipline like that, they'd find some corroboration to the weird vibe that I got that night and continue to feel. At any rate, as a layman, I suppose my opinion doesn't matter. But in my valueless opinion, that place is truly frightening. I never felt a vibe like that before. I just don't know how else to explain it. I mean, on the way there, everyone was laughing at me for being afraid to sit close to the windows. But once we started driving down Villa Main Road toward the train tracks, man, did we all squeeze to the center of the car, moving as far away from those open windows as we could manage. So I'd like to cast myself as the heroic driver in my story, but I was in the back seat, getting squashed from either side, and my cousin Manny was the one at the wheel. He was acting like he wasn't scared, and that he thought it was funny how freaked out the rest of us had become. I mean, we'd been driving for more than 2 hours, and now everyone was saying, let's just go home. Manny thought it would be really hysterical to turn off the engine on his mother's old Ford Fairmont two-door while we were on the train tracks. None of us laughed. In fact, we all started begging him to turn the car back on. Manny said, nope, I'm going to put the car in neutral and see if the ghost children push us across the tracks. He told us to be quiet and listen to hear the night outside. I tell you, my heart was beating hard, and I could feel our two friends with their hearts thumping to either side of me as well. We all wanted to scream, but we knew we'd better be quiet to satisfy Manny so that he would give up and drive us home. There wasn't much else we could do in the back seat of a two-door car with electric locks controlled by the driver. We were his captive audience. So at some point, we all noticed that we were slowly rolling forward. It was almost imperceptible at first, but as we rolled onto the tracks, we could definitely feel our momentum starting. Soon we were out all the way, blocking the track, and of course, the light of an approaching train appeared on the distant horizon. The joking wasn't funny any longer. We were going to end up the next tragic stories associated with that area. And then, out in front of us, on the other side of the tracks where we needed to get to, this mist appeared and swirled and grew as though a big rock band was about to walk out on stage and play a show. And out of that fog walked this man, who looked incredibly like a rougarou from back in Louisiana, where I lived the first dozen years of my life. Except, I had never thought that rougarous were real things. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, a rougarou or a loup-garou is a werewolf, or at least a creature that certainly resembles a werewolf from legends and movies. It's presumed, according to the local lore, to be a wizard transforming himself into a beast man deliberately. But I know that in most parts of the United States, when people see canine-headed upright figures in the woods, they presume them to be dogmen. Dogmen are allegedly upright walking animals with some features of a wolf, some features of a human, and some features which I don't suppose ever occur in nature outside of horror movies. Although the dogman is usually considered an animal like a bear, it is probably just as often spoken of in hushed tones as being something perhaps paranormal or supernatural. And even though the dogman or werewolf we saw that night was the only one that any of us ever saw, I doubt that you'd get any of us to say that we were certain the thing wasn't paranormal in one way or another. Or if it were natural, maybe it was from another level or plane of existence. As surprised as we all were to see that thing, I don't think we'd have been any more surprised if it vanished in a puff of smoke, or if it disappeared bit by bit, like the Cheshire Cat. Nevertheless, he did not do that. He just walked up to the edge of the tracks and looked around as if he were as confused about his presence there as we all were. So we had a train coming directly toward us and we needed to move forward. There was apparently a dogman or werewolf of some sort blocking that path to safety and escape. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Manny turned the key in the ignition, but the engine did not start. We all went silent. Manny tried again, and the engine sputtered to a pathetic halt for the second time in a row. The train's light was now illuminating the interior of the old Ford, and I prayed the conductor saw us in time to stop. That was when Manny finally succeeded in getting the engine to turn over. Now all he had to do was somehow get past that dogman blocking the road. Manny kicked it into gear and slammed on the gas, sending that car backward, unexpectedly, causing me to jerk my neck from the surprising direction of movement. Turning around, Manny finished backing us off the tracks and then stopped the car so we could watch the train rush past us. The train that very well might have written our final chapter. One of the guys in the car was yelling for Manny to keep going backward and that we should escape down Villamain Road. I also asked Manny what he was going to do once the train had finished passing and there was nothing else left between us and that dogman. Then that train did finish passing, and the dogman was nowhere in sight. We looked in both directions. We waited, and the only thing we heard was crickets and the train chugging away in the distance. This is why I wonder about the true nature of haunted places, and I wonder about the true nature of cryptids as well. Maybe Bigfoot and Dogman and Goatman are all perfectly natural animals in some alternate reality. Maybe that's how they can seem both physical and non-physical. Maybe that's how they can be here 1 minute and gone the next. Still, this one had been there just a minute prior, and we were still quite jumpy about him, assuming he must still be there in the scene in front of our eyes, even though we could not notice him anywhere. Had he really had time to run that far away as the train passed? There were all sorts of places on either side of the road ahead of us where that beast could be hiding, ready to jump out. Still, that was the way we had to go in order to begin our long ride home. So that was the way we were going to go. Before we did, though, we rolled up those windows. Why? Because no matter how hot the night, it's not worth chancing a direct physical encounter with. The Dogman on the Haunted Tracks. When you're talking about Ms. Gonzalez, then that is all, or das ist alles. When you're speaking of our executive producer Christina, that's more lovely than the music from an ocarina. Whether you like ocarina music or not, please join us in thanking our executive producer Christina Gonzalez for making this episode possible. Christina is one of our top tier members, and she gets all our secret perks. Hey everyone, it's the new Henry Lee Dogman throw pillow. It's just like laying your face up against me, except the claws and teeth on the pillow won't tear you to shreds, hooray! Also, it doesn't smell like a wet dog, woohoo! Look right below this very video to find out how to order. It's the softest way yet to support the channel and keep us online. The Dogman of the Haunted Woods. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Besides some fights I've had with landlords, the only scary story I ever actually lived through happened in a really spooky, bad, evil kind of place. You don't have to take my word for that either, as the original Sioux people living in the region literally named it a word that roughly translates to bad or evil from their language. And in fact, you don't even have to take my word for it that this is historical fact, as the state has erected this sign, which, as you can hopefully see, reads, "Unexplainable natural phenomenon," I think they mean phenomena, "resulted in fear-inspired legends, and prompted the area to be named Shicha by the Santee Sioux. Shicha means bad." I can tell you from personal experience that this place is some kind of a gateway in some way. I've seen things and experienced things in that place that made no sense to me. I can understand various natural explanations for some of the phenomena in the location, such as the strange lights seen in the darkness sometimes turn out to be bioluminescent plant or animal life, or even the cliched explanation swamp gas. But I don't think any of those kinds of debunking explanations will work when we're talking about seeing the Dogman, because one time, that was exactly what I think I saw. Now, this did not take place in Wisconsin or Michigan. It didn't take place along the High Strangeness Ridge they have in Pennsylvania that goes on down to West Virginia. It didn't happen in the Louisiana area either. This took place in a location that is not at all known for Dogman sightings, but is very famous for all sorts of other creepy things, including the documented disappearance of some people back in the 1970s who were never seen again. Yes, this is an account of things that happened to me in South Dakota, but it was in a part of the state which, as I've already pointed out, is officially recognized even by the Parks Department of having been considered bad by the people who lived here since a time earlier than most Europeans even knew South Dakota was a thing. Before I even tell you the details of my personal Dogman experience, I want to be upfront about the fact that I have my own theory about this incident and about cryptids in general. Now, some creatures of myth and legend, like the gorilla, eventually turned out to be as real as you or I. Others, though, like the Dogman, seem to me to be able to be real when they want to, and then vanish into nothingness when that would be preferable. And when they do appear, they seem to do it in the same areas over and over again. This has naturally led to theories about Dogman having migration patterns. I don't think migration patterns can explain the Dogman showing up in South Dakota, though, because that's where Shicha Hollow is located. Unless the Dogman has a helicopter, I don't see what path he could have used to migrate from either the Midwest or from Louisiana to get to where we were. Even though the Dogman was quite physically real, in the account I'm about to relate to you, I don't think he got to South Dakota by walking from Elkhorn, Wisconsin. There are these strange locations on the earth where odd things appear. Sheetja Hollow is one of them. To me, that narrows down the explanation to either being that the Dogman knows where entrances to underground cave or tunnel systems exist, and these strange areas I'm discussing are actually just adjacent to tunnel entrances known to the creature but unknown to the general human population. Or these window areas are more metaphysical in nature. The creatures and phenomena might not be coming from underground, but from other simultaneously existing timelines or realities. Since I can't produce enough evidence to prove either theory, I won't lie and say that I can. I do, however, want to be clear that those are my pet theories, so you should know where I'm coming from as I relate my personal narrative. I'm pretty sure that it's considered too dangerous to camp in this park. When those people disappeared there, it was presumed that they got swallowed up by the quicksand. There are signs in the swamp reminding you to stick to the path, but when I was in college, I hung with a crazy bunch of legend trippers, and we found places to camp out in that swamp. It was never easy. I wouldn't try it again. I'm lucky I survived, and you shouldn't try this at home. On the other hand, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and at least I have this true Dogman story I keep as a trophy to tell people when I feel I'm not getting enough attention. So we had camped 3 times before at this place, and one time we saw a glowing light coming from the tree cover after dark. We discovered it was something growing on the side of a tree, but we weren't really certain if it was bioluminescence from mushrooms or from some other kind of growth on that side of the tree. Once we determined it wasn't supernatural though, we just went back to camp. Now the time you're interested in when we saw the Dogman, that was the last time we went out there. We never even had a chance to sneak off and set up our camp that time, as we were met with a particularly vicious gatekeeper on that afternoon. To me, this was 100%, without a doubt, the kind of Dogman that people talk about in the Midwest, but that's not where we were. In fact, in Sheetja Hollow, Bigfoot is the cryptid that one would expect to see, judging by the existing cryptid sighting reports. I had never heard of werewolves in that vicinity, so when I first caught sight of a vaguely humanoid shape weaving in and out of the tree cover ahead of us, I froze and uttered a word that very few campers in the wilderness would ever want to hear. And that word was Bigfoot. Except we hadn't seen a Bigfoot, as I'm about to explain to you. Now, the 3 of us had all openly stated multiple times during the period when we knew each other that Sasquatch was the number one thing we hoped to see while camping out there. That being as it may, when I said the word Bigfoot, we all in unison turned around and began walking out the way we came in. We had seen Bigfoot shows on TV where people stay in the woods and hunt for Bigfoot, and they made it look like a fun thing to do. Once we actually saw a man-like creature covered in fur in the woods, though, looking like he was trying to ambush us or something, all of a sudden we weren't so brave. I mean, there wasn't even any discussion about it. I'm sure someone had a camera with them, probably in their backpack, but nobody moved toward the cryptid. We just turned around like we were the Borg, and we had one mind controlling all of us at once. One chicken mind. At first, we were just walking away, but then we could hear whatever that was back behind us walk out of the trees and bushes onto the trail of the spirits. We all sped up our walking a little bit, and I couldn't tell if the creature was following us or not. I risked turning around to look, and I saw something standing in the path, looking right back at me. It wasn't any sort of a Sasquatch, though. What I saw looking back, through eyes that glowed super bright, almost white, was something a lot more like a wolf man than an ape man. It had a longer snout than I was used to seeing on wolf men in the movies, and it looked more like a wolf than the ones I had seen on Chiller Theater. Its head was canine, not human. It stood up like a man, but the legs it stood on looked like those of a dog or a wolf. No man could fit his feet and ankles into that body, so it couldn't have been a costume. This was, I think, 1989 or 90, so it could have been recreated for a movie as a puppet. I don't think it would have been able to walk around then, and you would need tubes leading off to the controlling mechanisms. It would have taken a team of people to operate, and I don't know where they would have been hidden in that swamp on that late afternoon. I don't see how it could have been a hoax, but I also had never heard of anything that looked like what I was seeing. That's why these days I figure that must have been a dogman, just an out-of-place one. How he got to South Dakota I can't be certain, but that brings us back full loop on my theory that I talked about earlier. I was so surprised to be looking at a dog-headed human being that day that I stopped and I stared at the creature. The dogman did not like being stared at by a dumb college kid, and he flipped out, throwing an absolute fit. It was like a mix between barking and growling and a very human scream. He was furiously angry, and he made a bluff charge at us. How do I know it was a bluff charge? Well, I'm still alive to write this down for you, aren't I? There's no way we could have gotten away if that dog-headed man had really wanted to take us down. He was way bigger and more agile than we were, not to mention he was in a bad mood. So that was the last time the three of us guys ever went legend tripping. In fact, I don't even call it legend tripping anymore. I call it asking for trouble. And I had my mind changed about that by the Dogman of the Haunted Woods. Our EP is Ashley Johnson, as capital as the capital of Wisconsin. We'd like to thank you, oh dear Ashley, for keeping us alive with a bit of cashly. Please join me in thanking Ashley Johnson for making this episode possible. In exchange, they get cool perks like our secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to tell on this channel.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
I felt sorry for myself because I had no doorman. But then I met a man who had no scary stories, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot paraphernalia. Did you know you could be wearing a psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot t-shirt right now? They come in white, black colors, long sleeve, short sleeve, little baby red sleeve, wife beater size, pregnant wife size. Plus, you can own a scary story, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot hat, hoodie, journal, postcards, wall decals. All this can be yours right now by going to cafepress.com/scarystoriesnyc. Link is in the description. Welcome to Scary Stories. Someone recently wrote us a short email about Dogman that I'd like to read to you. Their email is what inspired this episode, and it was from someone with the handle Chris7000. They sent us this witness narrative that we're going to call My Parents Saw a Dogman. But what is a dogman? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was telling my grandparents about the dogman, who they said they had never heard of. Once I described it, though, they both grew wide-eyed and said that, in fact, they had both seen just that thing when they were married in their early 20s, back in the early 1950s. Grandpa had met Grandma in England, where she was born and grew up. When they decided to get married, they came back to the U.S. first so that their children could have U.S. citizenship along with their mother's naturalized citizenship. Grandma had always wanted to see Hollywood with her own eyes, so they got married in Los Angeles and spent their honeymoon sightseeing in the Hollywood area. This was the 1950s, and so vacationing in Hollywood didn't mean Universal Studios and Disney. It meant visiting locations where classic movies and TV shows were still being shot. The studios back in those days, even when they were active, always encouraged tourism, and hence had guided tours of the lots and of the sets. You could get to see a celebrity or two as they worked, which was exciting to a young lady from overseas and a young man from Wisconsin. It was during that honeymoon in Hollywood that they both told me that they saw what I was calling a dogman. Now that totally confused me. Grandpa was from Wisconsin. How had he not heard of the dogman even though he saw it himself? And how did he have to travel to California to see a Wisconsin werewolf? That's why I immediately started to wonder if he had actually seen something else. I mean, it was Hollywood. Maybe the two of them saw a man in werewolf makeup? I wasn't there, so I do have to ask these questions. Basically, they were about to head back to their hotel from the Garden of the Gods, where they had been pitching woo, when a very large man ran past them in a rude manner, almost knocking my grandmother to the ground in the process. Grandpa caught Grandma and attended to her needs, but she was far more surprised than hurt. Some men were crying out from behind them to stop that guy, but when Grandma and Grandpa turned to look, the figure was in the process of leaping down off the raised rocky land and onto the highway well below. He was doing it with such ease that everyone present gasped in awe. The beast man ran away as though he were motor-powered, as fast as any vehicle on that highway. Now, according to both of them, it did look like a werewolf-type entity. It had a canine-type head, according to my grandfather, but it ran like a man would upright on its hind legs. Grandma didn't deny the canine features, but she insisted it was wearing a cape and that it was a man. Grandpa told me it was a werewolf and that possibly his wife was remembering seeing remnants of torn clothing. But Grandma insisted that not only was it a humanoid, but it was Spring Hill Jack himself. Grandpa left us about 15 years back, and now my grandma, who will be 91 if she's still with us in July, has seen her health take a bad turn too. As a consequence, I've been thinking a lot about that story. It's just so strange to me that Grandma would acknowledge that she was seeing something that looked like an upright walking canine, and yet, to her it was also a man, and in fact was the legendary Spring Hill Jack. I was wondering if you ever think that maybe a lot of monster sightings might be misidentified dogman, or maybe the dogman sightings might even be a misidentified other. Might there be a simpler answer to all these cryptid and paranormal mysteries than any of us ever expected? I myself have never seen any monsters, so I can only hypothesize and ask questions. Yours cryptically, Chris 7000. Well, Chris, I'm very glad you are raising these kinds of questions. When we're dealing with legend and lore, we need to remember that these are just words, and words are descriptors used to attempt to describe or explain our experiences. We can allow our interpretations of words and phrases to create pictures in our mind, and then we think that those internal images are the original event described. Once we accept our own version of someone else's description of their personal experience as actually being the truth, we then begin to theorize based on what we are now considering hard, cold facts. But these are not facts. These are our internal interpretations of something written by someone else many years ago, often by people from the 20th century who aren't around to explain their intentions and meanings to us any longer. When we read old stories of wood boogers, there are often scanty descriptions of the creature's appearance. It's presumed that most 20th century monster stories are really talking about the Bigfoot. But this long after the fact, a lot of that might not be considered open to at least a little bit of questioning. And it's especially interesting to me that a lady who moved here from England in the 20th century saw a cryptid and called it Spring Hill Jack. We should take a sidetrack into who or what Jack was, since he or it was many things to many people. See this drawing? It's meant to depict Spring Hill Jack. It's some kind of demonic monster. See this one? Again, the devilish bat-winged character is supposed to be Spring Hill Jack. Again, here, another naked monster man. There were all sorts of depictions of him, because there were all sorts of descriptions of him in the media of the day. That's right, there supposedly was some kind of truth behind Spring Hill Jack way back in the year 1837, when people were seeing him on the streets of suburban London. Although people agreed there was a truth behind this, they differed about what the truth was. Was he a monster with bat wings? If so, why was he sometimes alleged to have spoken proper English, with a London accent even? Yet if he were just a man, why did his eyes glow in the dark the way they did? Why was he alleged to have long, sharp claws, the same as the Dogman is said to have? One story has him waking up a sleeping woman and demanding she bring him a light. When she goes outside and brings him a candle, he somehow applies the flame to his chest, where it remained lit. This means he had a light on his chest like Iron Man. He is then said to have breathed fire at the woman from his mouth. Explain that to me. In the 1960s and 70s, my late friend John Keel wondered in print if Spring Hill Jack were one of the types of creatures that more recently we would interpret as space aliens. I don't think Keel would be offended by me wondering if Spring Hill Jack actually belongs filed in the same place as cryptid creatures, because he also suspected that monsters and aliens were all, in a sense at least, coming from the same place. I might mean that figuratively, but then again, it's hard to mean anything in a literal way when one is discussing either theology or cryptozoology. They're both, at least at this stage of our development, so open to personal interpretation and reinterpretation. Now, before you laugh at Spring Hill Jack as an unimportant piece of trivia from a long time ago, I'd like to point out that by 1904, this is what Spring Hill Jack looked like. He was no longer thought of as a monster from hell or some sort of demon. He was now thought to be a rich man, disguising himself as something scary looking in order to fight crime and make life better for the working class people who have it so hard. How was he able to leap over tall fences or shine lights out from his chest through the dark night? Well, he was rich enough to hire someone to invent spring-heeled boots that would propel him over tall fences. He was rich enough to buy advanced technology before the general public learned of it. 10 years later, this formula was copied directly to create the character Zorro. After that, the Shadow came about, based on Zorro and Spring Hill Jack. After that came Batman, another rich guy who disguised himself as something scary to fight crime. Like Zorro, Batman hides out in a cave. Like Spring Hill Jack, he uses advanced scientific weapons that appear magical to his enemies, which strike fear in their hearts. Here's a cover of an old Spring Hill Jack Penny Dreadful magazine from the early 20th century. Now here's the first appearance of Batman in 1938 on the cover of Detective Comics number 27. See how on the one side, Batman is wearing his famous bat cape that we all now know and love. But look at his other side, where he's clearly wearing not a cape but a bat wing under his arm, directly copied from the old 1904 Spring Hill Jack costume. The story is that Bob Kane, the artist, wanted Batman to have bat wings under his armpits like Spring Hill Jack, but the writer, Bill Finger, wanted Batman to wear a cape. So it looks like Bob Kane drew both at once in this first illustration of the character. In either case, the mask is virtually identical. Although the creators of Batman did credit Zorro and the Shadow as inspirations, I don't think they ever acknowledged how much all these projects were taken from Spring Hill Jack. Even the creators of Superman admitted that the reason Clark Kent acts so weak is because that's what Zorro did in his secret identity also. The idea back then was that nobody would suspect that the foppish, effeminate guy was really the superhero in disguise. This is why Batman acts like a playboy when he's Bruce Wayne, and Clark Kent acts like a coward around Lois. They took this from Zorro, who took it from the early 20th century stories about Spring Hill Jack. Both of my late friends, John A. Keel and Timothy Green Beckley, used to talk a lot about coincidences and synchronicities. They seem to play major roles in the lives of people who start to investigate the strange and the weird. Here's another example of that. Check out this overhead view of the area that Chris's grandparents claim they had their Dogman encounter at back in the early 1950s. This is an area that old westerns and western TV shows were still being shot at back in that time. Right here is the rock that the Lone Ranger and Silver famously posed in front of. And over here is the former Iverson movie ranch where Zorro's cave from the old TV show is still located. I believe it's in the backyard of a condominium now, but it is still there. It's a 1-minute drive away from where Chris's grandma claims she saw Spring Hill Jack, and it's known for its association with Zorro, who was inspired by Spring Hill Jack. When you realize that the creature was running from the direction of Zorro's cave, and then leaping a great distance to escape a mob chasing him, it almost makes me wonder if the creature we're discussing was actually physical or permanent in nature. Chris's grandma fell down as it passed, so the natural assumption is to expect that this was a normal physical entity. But what if it was a tulpa? What if all those people making their livings shooting the Zorro TV show, which would have been in production I think when this happened, all those cast and crew imagining Zorro's life into reality every day, maybe they somehow manifested or conjured or called up a tulpa of the entity of Spring Hill Jack, or a version of his spirit or character at any rate. Neither of my grandparents reported bat wings on the creature, but Grandma did insist that he wore a cape. Their two descriptions did not entirely match up, even though they both claimed they saw the same thing as each other. In one of Keel's old books, he talked about the ghost of the Shadow being seen in the house where the Shadow stories were originally written. How can something have a ghost if it never actually lived? That's where Keel brought the idea of the tulpa into Western paranormal and UFO research. I'm kind of with our contributor Chris on this. I'm asking the same questions that they are. How can two people see the same thing at the same time and yet come away with such different descriptions? Could the answer be that there was more than one thing to see? Or could it be that a tulpa can appear differently to different people depending on which version of the character they choose to look at? Sorry to have so many more questions than answers this episode. You guys have been saying you want more historical stories from us when possible, and this was that. The trouble is that with Dogman and cryptids in general, sometimes truth is even stranger than fiction. Hooray for Matt, he's never flat. Mr. Stitch, like a Cy Young pitch. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer Matthew Stitch for making this episode possible. Matthew donated $50 to us using our brand new thanks button under this or any of our videos. We literally couldn't survive without kind people like Matt, as YouTube has recently decided to limit our videos to only being watched by people already subscribed to us. They're making it impossible to grow the channel, and it seems they want us to go away. We're gonna have to start an audio podcast version of the show by June because we need to expand beyond YouTube. They've backed us into a corner and left us with no other choice. I'd like Matthew Stitch and everyone else who donates to us using our thanks button to know that if you contact me through our email and ask to see some of our weekly secret uncensored episodes, I think it's only fair that you should get to check them out. I just need your email or some other private way to message the video links to you. Of course, our channel membership and PayPal subscriber club are still alive, and you can get various cool perks in return for helping us out that way. Henry Lee Dogman here with a special announcement. As we all know, the gods of YouTube giveth, and the gods of YouTube taketh away. But in this case they have giveth. What hath they giveth, you asketh? Well, they have giveth you a new way to say thank you to us. They call it Super Thanks, and it's for those who want to help us stay online, but don't want to make monthly payments. You can grant us a one-time payment from $2 up to $50, depending on how generous you feel. It's sort of a way to do a super chat for us channels that don't do live streams. It's become a lot harder for our channel recently as the algorithm has stopped allowing as many people who aren't already subscribed to even find out about our videos. We can use any help that Providence allows to get us through these dark times, and so we thank whoever at YouTube decided to provide us with this, and any of you kind enough to consider using it. Now, it's time for Bigfoot to bust a rhyme. Biggie? Hey. Psst. Hey. Are you awake? Oh, good, you're awake. It's me, the monster in your bedroom. You want to hang out? Don't worry about that dogman outside. I locked your windows and your bedroom door for you. I've got this creepy story I'd like to tell you, would you mind? I mean, if you don't want to hear it, just say so. I can always use sleep paralysis on you and tell the story that... Okay, calm down. Get comfortable because now it's just you and me. And I can tell you the very true story of... the invisible colored thing. Ready? I don't mind if you'd like to sip hot cocoa through this, or something cooler if it's warm in your bed over there. If you feel the need to pull the covers up over your head, I will take that as a personal compliment. Alrighty? Fine. Then let us begin. This is a story about someone you know. Someone you know very well, in fact, but you've never heard this story before. When I'm done with this story, not only will you see this person in an entirely new light, but you'll be way too scared to get to sleep tonight. What person am I talking about? Well, I'll just let you figure all that out as my little true story progresses. So this person we're discussing, let's call them Captain Protagonista, was called into a coroner's inquest since they were the only witness of some kind of animal attack that resulted in the demise of an individual we shall refer to hereafter as the victim. A nearby medical examiner had been unable to fully comprehend the way the victim had passed on, and was most curious to hear what the captain had to say. When they sat down and told their version of how things went down, though, the officials present had even more questions than before the meeting had begun. So Captain P and the victim were on a walk through a particular natural area which shall remain nameless. You know exactly which one. It's located pretty close to where you are right now as you're listening to this, right? Relatively speaking. The captain and the victim appeared to be in that obscure location to have a secret conversation of some sort. Neither of them appeared to be dressed for camping or hiking, yet the captain studiously avoided any explanation of the purpose of their strange meeting. Since the victim had clearly been done in by an animal, and not a human, the captain was not under suspicion, and the inquest was limited as to how much they could dive into the personal lives of the two people without the willing cooperation of the surviving member of the duo. So, here's what Captain P told the assembled. Get comfortable. This account takes a minute to unfold. I quote at length from the testimony given at the victim's coroner's inquest. Quote, The victim and I were having difficulty conversing because we felt certain that we were being spied upon. After some length of time, we could hear the sound of some large man or beast inside the woodline, confirming our suspicions. Angrily we called to whomever was in the woods to show themselves, and there was a great crashing sound as whoever or whatever was in there moved quickly through the dense undergrowth to better conceal their location. It was too late, though, as we both had become alarmed, and we both knew we were in danger. Turning around to leave, I heard the large man or beast rushing out of the vegetation behind us, and I shouted at my companion that we needed to run. Turning around to see what was actually chasing us, I saw nothing at all. This caused me to laugh and to let my guard down. I told my companion there was nothing following us, and in the very next instant, I felt myself bumped into by something musky smelling and larger than I was. I went flying, and yet I could not see what had thrown me backward. Landing in the wet sand at the edge of a pond, I got all wet, and so became concerned with extricating myself from the water and the muddy beach. Looking around for and calling out to my companion, I discovered I got no call back from them. My own problems shrank in importance as I searched around for wherever they had gone. This was when I spotted the victim again, or at least parts of the victim. This is not to say that their body was not intact, because it was. It was just that somehow, sometimes, I could not see an arm, or a leg, or parts of their sides. It was as though something were between me and the victim, and yet what I saw was what was behind the victim, not in front. It made my brain feel as though it had been stirred into a drink. I know, and you know, that the victim's remains are still all together, and yet sometimes I witnessed parts of my poor companion disappear and then return. You call me in here today hoping I can explain to you whether this was a bear or cougar attack. You noticed, no doubt, that whatever hurt this individual had hands. You can also tell from the extant evidence that the hands it had are far too large to be human. I'm sure you've also noticed that the beast has claws, but the claws are too large and too widely spaced to belong to any known creature on the surface of this planet. I would imagine this is one reason why you all seemed so particularly interested in my testimony. Well, I'm sorry to ruin things for you by providing such a complicated answer. And there's one more thing I need to inform you of, which is only going to cause even more confusion in you as it has in me. As I saw my companion suffering the attack of this invisible whatever it was, I became desperate to try to save him. I picked up rocks and tossed them at my guess of where the beast's body might be located. If I saw one bounce off something that wasn't there, I used that location as my next target. I found a heavy stick on the ground and went to work with all my strength, flailing wildly at my invisible opponent. And then it stopped attacking the victim, and I saw it appear to go from gaseous to liquid to solid form in the space of a few seconds in front of my eyes. And the solid form it took was one of a large canine, reared up on its hind limbs, charging forward toward me, fangs bared. I fell backward onto the wet ground and covered my face with my arms for the inevitable attack, but as you know, that never came. When I opened my eyes and looked around, the creature was absent. Sadly, the results of his appearance were not, and my companion was no longer with us. You ask me how such a thing could possibly be, and for that, I think I might have an answer. Just as there are infrared or ultraviolet colors that human eyes can't see, so there must be infrared or ultraviolet life forms. Either that, or there are chameleon creatures out there who can at least sometimes become the color of invisible, at least to creatures such as us humans. Such a creature as this has to have been what did the victim in. End of extended quotation. You know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like a dogman with predator-like cloaking abilities. The inquest allowed the captain's testimony, but ruled that the victim had been done in by a bear. Everyone laughed at how crazy the captain must have been to think such a thing as invisible werewolves could possibly exist. So, did that story ring a bell? No, I'm not asking if it reminds you of another narrative. I'm asking if it brings up a sense of déjà vu. Don't you remember anything like this ever happening to... Really? You don't? Wade, what year is it tonight? It's 2023, right? What? Oh, I'm so sorry. None of this has happened to you yet. Wow. Well, please do me a favor, okay? When it does happen, can you please pretend that you had no foreknowledge of the Dogman or anything? It could get me into a lot of trouble, seriously. Until next time, this is the monster in your bedroom, daring you to get back to sleep. Huh? What's that? Just kidding, I've got to haze the new monster. Seriously, if you liked what he did, please let us know and show others the video. If you didn't like it, then leave comments about how great your old pal Bigfoot is, and we'll all have a big LOL at the shadowy hat guy's expense. I'd like to name Godzilla Tim Walker our executive producer for multiple episodes this week, and this episode you're watching can be the first of several. Godzilla Tim is kind of our #1 supporter. He deserves to be executive producer more often than we can give him the title. Nobody supports us like he does, so we're gonna do more episodes this coming week in which we will have new rhymes for Godzilla Tim. Here to explain all the ways you can help the channel and what perks you can expect in return is international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.